The moment I realized the wolves were swimming straight toward my boat, my throat went dry. The lake was calm just a minute earlier, only small ripples tapping the sides of the old wooden hull. Then I saw the first head break the surface, then another, and before I could process it, the whole pack was cutting through the water in a tight line. I counted 7 of them, all moving with slow, heavy strokes, as if every meter cost them more strength than they had left. I stood up too fast, and the boat lurched, almost throwing me off balance. I grabbed the paddle with both hands and held it out like a shield. My voice cracked when I yelled out, half warning, half panic, but the wolves didn't react the way I expected. No growls, no baring of teeth. They just kept coming, steady and determined. The nearest one, a light gray wolf with darker patches around its eyes, lifted its head higher above the surface. Its ears were flat, not aggressive, more like it was exhausted. I could hear its breathing even over the soft slap of the waves. Short, sharp, desperate breaths. It wasn't charging me. It was struggling to stay afloat. Still, fear controlled every muscle I had. I kept the paddle raised, bracing for the moment it would try to climb into the boat. When it reached the side, it pressed its snout against the wood. Not a bite, just a push, like it needed something solid to lean on. The whole boat tilted from the weight of the contact, and I stumbled backward, slamming my knee against the bench. Cold water splashed in. I cursed under my breath and shoved the paddle between us, nudging the wolf away. It didn't fight me. It didn't even look offended. It just kept staring up at me with eyes that didn't match the situation. Tired, wide, almost pleading. I finally noticed the rest of the pack closing in behind it. Their strokes were uneven. Some swam at an angle, like one side of their bodies hurt. One wolf briefly dipped under and resurfaced with a violent shake, barely keeping its head above the water. Then something else reached my ears. A low, distant rumble. Not thunder. The sky was gray but still. This sound was coming from the forest on the far side of the lake. A deep mechanical growl that rose and fell, followed by short metallic clanks. I stopped moving just to hear it better. The wolves reacted instantly. All 7 turned their heads the same direction, toward the tree line. Even the one pressed against my boat jerked slightly, paws continuing to paddle on instinct. Whatever was behind them wasn't just chasing them, it terrified them. Rain started as a drizzle, then thickened. The drops hammered the lake, blurring the reflections of the dark pines along the shore. My hand slipped on the wet paddle, and I tightened my grip. I didn't know whether to push off harder or help the wolves somehow, but helping wild wolves wasn't exactly something you decide in the middle of a storm. Another noise cut through the air, this time sharper. A crack that echoed across the water. A gunshot. I froze. The wolves didn't. They flinched all at once, their paddling turning frantic for a moment. The one at my boat scraped at the wood with its paw, accidentally rocking the boat. I stumbled again and nearly fell into the water. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone in the forest was firing toward the lake. Not at me, at them. The wolves weren't coming for me. They were fleeing. Another shot rang out, farther away but unmistakable. The sound carried over the lake and sank into my bones. I lowered the paddle for a moment, breathing hard, and felt the boat drift sideways with the wind. The wolves stayed clustered near me, as if my small wooden boat was the only safe thing they had left. And for the first time since it all started, their fear scared me more than their teeth ever could. The gunshots echoed across the lake long after the sound should have died. I kept one hand on the paddle and the other on the edge of the boat, trying to steady myself while the wolves circled weakly beside me. The rain blurred the distance, turning the far tree line into a dark, trembling wall. I knew I couldn't stay in the middle of the water forever. I needed to get to shore, any shore, even if the wolves followed. As I started rowing, my mind ran back to what I had seen the day before. The memory felt sharper now, like it had been trying to warn me even then. I had gone into the woods looking for a good spot to cast from shore, carrying nothing but my rod, a thermos, and a stubborn sense that I needed a quiet day. The fishing had been slow, and I ended up walking deeper than usual. That's when I noticed the first set of tracks, not from deer or bear, but from a pair of heavy off-road tires. The dirt was churned up, still soft at the edges, meaning the vehicle had passed recently. A little farther ahead, broken branches marked where it had forced its way between saplings. I remember muttering something to myself about idiots tearing up protected land, but I didn't think more of it until I found what was left of an elk. Only half the carcass remained, ripped open and surrounded by trampled ground. Ravens scattered when I approached. The meat wasn't rotten. Whatever had killed it had done so maybe a day earlier. Next to the carcass, I found cigarette butts. 3 of them, some still with the filter intact, soaked from a recent drizzle. Whoever had been here hadn't bothered hiding their tracks. Back then I thought it might just be careless hunters, but now, listening to gunshots being fired toward the lake, the theory felt a lot darker. I had called Carter yesterday, standing right there beside the elk. He picked up on the second ring, his voice rough like he hadn't slept. I told him about the quad tracks and the carcass. I remember his sigh through the phone. He said he'd been getting reports of people setting illegal traps deeper in the woods, but he didn't have the manpower to track them down. He told me to stay cautious and to call again if I saw anything else. What I didn't expect was seeing anything else today swimming straight at me. The boat drifted a little as I changed grip on the paddle. The wolves struggled to keep formation, but they stayed with me as I angled the boat toward the nearest shore. I risked leaning over the side to get a closer look at the nearest wolf. Rainwater dripped down its muzzle, but something else caught my eye. On its shoulder, just above the wet fur, were tiny punctures, like small fragments had scraped across the skin. I steadied the boat and checked another wolf as it rose slightly with a wave. Same marks. Small cuts. Some bleeding lightly, others already crusted. These weren't from fights within the pack. These were from something hitting them. Shrapnel, pellets, maybe even debris from an exploding trap. Another gunshot cracked through the rain. Not close, but not far enough to ignore. I felt the wolves tense beside the boat, all 7 heads turning toward the echo. I inhaled slowly, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. Someone had driven these animals into the water. Someone was still trying to reach them. I rowed harder, pulling the boat toward the shadowy line where the trees met the shore. I didn't know what I would find when I got there, or who would be waiting, but I couldn't stay on the lake while something hunted the wolves from the land. The rain thickened, the sky darkened, and the next shot rang so sharply it felt like it sliced the air. I lowered my head and whispered to myself that I needed to reach the shore before anyone else did. The closer I came to the shore, the more the wolves clustered around the boat, as if the open water still felt safer than whatever waited among the trees. The rain softened, turning into a fine mist that hovered above the lake like a thin veil. I pushed the paddle through the water in slow, careful strokes until the hull scraped against the muddy bank. The wolves hesitated. None of them rushed out of the water. They lingered near the boat, treading weakly, glancing between me and the shoreline. Their ears were angled back, not toward me but toward the forest, as if they expected something to burst through the shadows at any moment. I stepped out first, boots sinking into the wet soil. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the fear that I had rowed directly into someone else's line of fire. I pulled the boat farther onto the bank and scanned the tree line for movement. Fresh tire tracks cut across the mud, running from a narrow trail into the deeper woods. The tread pattern was wide, probably from a lifted pickup or an older off-road truck. The marks looked recent, edges still sharp despite the rain. Behind me, the wolves finally began to emerge from the water, one by one. They didn't scatter like wild animals normally would when reaching land. Instead, they gathered close together in a loose circle, their bodies touching or nearly touching, as if shielding one another. The gray wolf who had pressed against my boat earlier took the front position, head low, eyes fixed on the same muddy trail. Something about the way they stuck together made my stomach twist. They weren't regrouping, they were bracing. I moved slowly along the tree line and crouched behind a fallen log, its bark soaked and soft. From there I had just enough cover to watch the trail. The forest ahead was still, but not silent. I could hear faint voices carried by the damp air. 2 men stepped into view a moment later. Both held rifles slung at their sides. Their jackets were worn, muddy, the kind of gear people used when they spent more time in the woods than at home. They were arguing, angry, sharp whispers that cut through the quiet. The taller man kicked at the mud and muttered something about ruined traps. The shorter one shook his head and raised his rifle slightly, frustration in every movement. I leaned in, trying to hear more without giving myself away. The tall man said they should have had the whole pack by now. The short one snapped back that the wolves had scattered faster than expected, ruining the line of traps they had spent days setting. Then he said something that made my blood run cold, that they weren't leaving until they finished the job. It hit me then. These weren't hunters. They were trapping illegally, running a line wide enough to catch an entire pack. And the wolves had broken through it. I glanced back at the animals behind me. They were still huddled together, barely moving except for their shivering flanks. They had come to the lake because they had nowhere else to run. One of the men raised his voice, saying the last thing they needed was someone finding the wounded wolves alive. If anyone reported it, they would lose more than just a few traps. The implication was clear. They intended to finish the kill. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs as I shrank lower behind the log. I couldn't let them see me, not with the wolves right behind me on the bank. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what to do next. Then the shorter man stopped mid-sentence. He stared past the trees, squinting. My boat. His hand tightened on his rifle as he stepped toward the shoreline, eyes narrowing with suspicion. The tall man followed, scanning the area. I pressed myself flat against the soaked wood and felt the mud chill my palms. The wolves behind me went silent. They had spotted my boat, and it was only a matter of seconds before they found me too. The sound of boots crushing wet leaves snapped me into motion. I pushed away from the fallen log and moved along the tree line, keeping as low as I could. My palms were slick with rain and sweat, and every step felt louder than it should have. The wolves followed at a distance of several steps, their movements quiet but tense, their ears flicking at every sound behind us. I didn't dare look back to see how close the men were. The only plan I had was to put as many trees as possible between us. The forest swallowed us quickly. The farther we moved from the shoreline, the thicker the air felt, damp and heavy with the smell of moss, wet pine, and churned earth. My boots slipped on mud as I hurried along a narrow path that wound between clusters of ferns and fallen branches. I kept one hand against a tree trunk every few steps to steady myself. My breath fogged the air as the chill settled deeper into the woods. The wolves stayed behind me, but never too far, forming a loose, protective line that mirrored my pace. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the screen. One bar of service blinked weakly. I tapped Carter's name and held the phone to my ear while I kept walking. It rang once, twice, then the signal dropped. The call failed. I tried again, but the screen froze and the icon vanished completely. No service, just an empty signal icon mocking me. My heart pounded harder. I didn't know how close the men were, but faint shouting drifted between the trees behind us. They had found the trail. They were following. I could almost picture them pushing through the branches, scanning the ground for footprints, rifles ready. I pressed forward, weaving through the forest. Every time I slowed, the wolves slowed with me. When I picked up speed, they matched it. Their discipline surprised me. They weren't frantic now, just focused, as if they had accepted me as part of the group. The old gray wolf kept glancing back, checking the distance between us and the danger. The ground began to change beneath my feet. The earth grew softer, spongy, sucking at my boots with each step. I recognized the warning signs an instant before the path opened into a broad stretch of muddy ground. A bog. The rain had swollen it into a treacherous expanse of waterlogged soil. I hesitated at the edge. The wolves halted too, their bodies tense, their eyes locked on me as if waiting for direction. The old wolf stepped forward and sniffed the air, then turned sharply to the right. It took several deliberate steps along a thin ridge of firmer earth, moving slowly to make sure the rest of us could follow. I stepped onto the ridge, trusting its instincts more than my own. My foot slipped once, my leg plunging knee-deep into cold muck. The shock of the cold made me gasp aloud. I grabbed a low branch just in time, pulling myself back onto solid ground. The bog bubbled quietly where my foot had been, hiding the danger beneath a thin skin of debris. Behind us, another shout echoed, closer now. The men had entered the woods. They weren't far. I pushed forward, following the wolf's lead along the ridge. The rest of the pack stayed close, weaving around patches of unstable ground with practiced ease. They moved like they had crossed places like this before. The forest darkened as the canopy grew thicker, blocking what little light the clouded sky provided. The rain barely reached the ground here, but the air was colder, filled with the smell of wet bark and old leaves. My breath came out in uneven bursts as I forced myself onward. Every few seconds I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see movement, expecting a shadow to break away from the trees. Another attempt at my phone gave me the same result. No service, the icon blinking and vanishing as quickly as it appeared. I shoved it back into my pocket and focused on the path ahead, forcing myself to ignore the growing ache in my legs. My calves burned from the effort, but I didn't dare slow down. The wolves trotted steadily, their paws silent on the damp earth. For a moment, as the old wolf glanced back at me with tired but determined eyes, I felt something shift inside me. These animals weren't dangerous, they were desperate. They were running for their lives, just as I was. We pushed deeper into the woods until the trees suddenly opened into a clearing. The air changed, lighter but colder. At the far end stood a weathered wooden structure, a small hunting post, its roof sagging but intact. Moss climbed the legs of the platform, and the ladder creaked in the wind. A metal railing circled the narrow perch above. Not a perfect shelter, but enough to get a vantage point and maybe a moment to breathe. I hurried toward it, boots splashing through shallow puddles. I climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time, my hands slipping on the wet metal. The wolves gathered at the base as if guarding the area, their eyes scanning the tree-line for movement. From the platform, I lifted my phone again. One bar flickered into existence, then wavered, threatening to vanish. Weak, but something. My chest tightened. I pressed call and prayed the signal held, even for a few seconds. The signal wavered so weakly I wasn't sure the call had gone through until I heard a faint click. Then Carter's voice, distant and broken, pushed through the static. I pressed the phone hard against my ear, crouching low on the platform to keep myself steady. "Mark, where are you?" Your call dropped. I kept my voice low, barely louder than a whisper. "In the woods, north side of the lake. 2 men with rifles. They're after the wolves." His reply cut in and out, but I caught enough to feel a pulse of hope. "Stay put. I'm close. Don't let them see you." The line went dead again, but I didn't need more. Carter had heard me. He was coming. Below the platform, the wolves stayed gathered in a loose cluster, their bodies angled outward as if forming a protective perimeter. The old gray wolf lifted its head, ears turning toward the trail we had come from. I followed its gaze. Branches cracked in the distance. The men were close. I flattened myself on the platform and peeked over the edge. The clearing stretched wide and uneven, and the woods behind it shifted with movement. Seconds later, the shorter man emerged, scanning the ground with narrowed eyes. His partner followed, cursing under his breath as he surveyed the open space. They were tracking us. The shorter man pointed toward the muddy prints leading up to the base of the hunting post. His voice carried just enough for me to hear. They didn't get far. Must be close. He gripped his rifle tighter and stepped toward the post. My breath hitched. The wolves tensed but didn't advance. They stayed still, ears flat, bodies trembling but restrained. They didn't want to fight. They wanted this to end. A sudden engine roar broke through the woods. The men jerked their heads up just as a truck burst into view from the opposite trail, skidding slightly on the wet ground. The driver's door swung open before the vehicle fully stopped. "Carter." He shouted something I couldn't hear clearly, but his tone was sharp enough to freeze the men in place. They turned toward him, rifles half raised, but Carter already had his own service weapon drawn. His stance was steady, unmoving. "Drop them. Now." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Rain pattered on the leaves, distant thunder rumbled, and the wolves watched like statues around the base of the platform. Then the taller man lowered his rifle slowly. The shorter one hesitated, jaw clenched, but finally let his weapon slip from his hands. It hit the wet ground with a dull thud. Carter stepped forward, keeping both men in sight. Reinforcements arrived moments later, a second ranger truck, then a county deputy's vehicle. The officers moved in quickly, placing the men in cuffs before escorting them toward the road. The threat was over. Only then did my legs begin to shake. I climbed down from the platform, my hands gripping the cold metal rungs. When my boots touched the ground, the wolves shifted but didn't scatter. They simply watched me. The old gray wolf stepped forward a few paces, its eyes locked onto mine. Rain dripped from its muzzle, but its posture was calm now, steady. It took one more step, close enough that I could see the thin scar running across its shoulder. For a moment, the world around us seemed to pause. Carter stood a few yards away, silent. Even the officers slowed their movements as they noticed the scene. The wolf held my gaze for several long seconds. Not fearful, not aggressive, just present, acknowledging me in a way I didn't expect. Then it turned, slow and deliberate, and padded toward the trees. The others followed, one by one, their forms blending into the shadows until the forest swallowed them completely. Carter let out a low breath beside me. I've been doing this a long time, Mark. I don't see wolves stand their ground like that. Not unless they trust someone. I didn't know how to respond. The truth sat heavy on my chest. Those animals had survived because they ran, and maybe because they chose not to run from me. Hours later, after statements and questions and handshakes with exhausted officers, I finally walked back toward the lake. The rain had slowed to a whisper, and the shoreline was quiet. My boat, still pulled halfway onto the bank, waited where I had left it. I approached it slowly, taking in the calm water and the soft ripple of wind across the surface. Then I saw it. A single wolf print pressed into the wet sand beside the boat. Clear, fresh, perfectly shaped. It couldn't have been more than minutes old. I crouched beside it, letting the moment settle over me. A quiet understanding I couldn't put into words. Sometimes, I whispered to myself, nature knows who's really listening. And for the first time that day, a strange calm washed through me. A reminder that not every danger in the wild comes from the wild itself. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories. And now just click the playlist or the next video on your screen.